What's going on, guys? My name is Mark Steele, and this is Kate Teves, the founder and CEO of the HR Pro. Kate, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, I appreciate it. So, before we get into the HR Pro and everything you're doing from HR and recruitment standpoint, tell us about your journey before starting the company. What led you to the HR Pro?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I've always loved working with people. So a lot of my earlier career starts in retail. And, I've worked through sales and then into store management and things like that. And
Mhm.
I really, truly enjoyed not only connecting with clients, but also to recruit and onboard staff and then help them out with their career progression through the company as well.
Right.
Eventually, I decided that was my calling and I decided to go back to school for human resources.
Mhm.
And it took me about 2 years to complete my program because I was still working full time in retail. And I loved it. I actually didn't want to leave because there was a part of me that was still so attached to both the brand that I was working for, plus all of my staff and my colleagues in general in the office. So interestingly enough, when I finished my schooling, although there wasn't an HR position in the company, they've actually promoted me to be an operations manager for
Cool.
the 35 brick and mortar locations that we've had across Canada. So that was a
Mhm.
really interesting experience because it had a lot of pieces of HR that were still very relevant. So job descriptions, putting job postings online, and things like that. So I
Right.
really enjoyed that. But then eventually, of course, I did want to sort of spread my wings a little bit more, and I started working for another company. It was corporate. It was also not at all what I was expecting because it wasn't brick and mortar and it wasn't retail. It was e-coms, which was totally different. Really cool learning experience, very steep learning curve, I have to say.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Um, right. And then eventually I just decided that I was going to start my own business. It wasn't necessarily a decision that I made overnight. I unfortunately ended up losing my job in the beginning of 2020. And it wasn't at the best time of our lives. We were expecting our second child, and it wasn't
Mhm.
the best time to go looking for work because, of course, COVID was just around the corner.
Right.
And we knew that it was coming to Canada. And so it put me in a bit of a prickly position, but I ended up actually making sure that I stay true to my values and my integrity. And I ended up finding a contract, a 6 months contract, which was
Mhm.
exactly what I wanted and exactly what my family needed. And
Okay.
then I said, I'm going to take a year. I'm going to spend this year with my baby at home, and I'm going to figure out how I'm going to build a business that's going to sustain me and my family for many, many years to come. So that
Mhm.
is exactly what I did. And so I started the HR Pro.
Okay, very cool. A question about when you switched from brick and mortar to the e-com. You mentioned it was challenging, a learning curve.
Right.
Is it always tough as an HR professional switching industries, or was that a specific difference because it was physical versus online primarily?
It was both, to be honest, Mark. So, I mean, the way that the company functioned was very different. The way that the challenges that they've had from an HR standpoint was very
Yeah.
different as well. So, in brick and mortar, obviously, you see people face to face all the time. There's different conflicts, personality conflicts, task conflicts, so you have to manage that.
Mhm.
Whereas with online, it's really and truly more so setting the proper policies and procedures to make sure that people are working during specific work hours, that they're accessible, that tasks are being executed. How do we document that? Versus in brick and mortar, it's, hey, how many sales did you have today? Well, I've had five. Your goal is six. Great, right? So you still have time to do that one extra sale.
Of
With
course.
e-com, it's a little bit different because all of the tools of management are also online. And coming from that, brick and mortar is known for the pen and paper management style, right?
Yeah.
Learning all of these project management boards and HR systems and things of that nature was its own challenge.
Mhm.
So kind of a double-edged sword there.
That makes sense. And then during the pandemic, obviously a lot of or most companies went from physical to online. And then after the pandemic sort of washed away a little bit, there was this push for some offices to go back in person, and some of them were staying online. And there was a lot of contention between some employers and some employees. So,
Mhm.
what kind of challenge did you face during that time when people were considering going back into the office versus resisting it?
Well, so by that time, I had already started my own business, and I've been working very heavily with the real estate industry ever since.
Mhm.
And so, the real estate actually never really went online. It was always in an office, in person, face-to-face job.
Right.
Now, of course, we did create a lot of programs where people could potentially work in a hybrid capacity, where that before that was out of the question. Now
Mhm.
there was a little bit more um, leniency towards that as well. But I can't say that I've encountered major challenges. All of my clients are essentially, well, they're essential. They're an essential business, so they have to be face to face. So we've never really experienced many of these challenges. However, the interesting thing is since the pandemic has died down, so let's say
Mhm.
last year and this year as well, we are seeing a lot of candidates that are looking for hybrid or remote work,
Right.
even in sectors like real estate. So
Right.
it's been an interesting development, I think. But I always say if you are somebody who's just starting out your career or looking to grow, it is
Mhm.
so important to be around other people who are in different positions that you might not come across on a Zoom call because they're in a different department, for example.
Right. That makes sense.
But I remember, me being early on in my career, being around CEOs, CFOs that I didn't necessarily work on projects with, but just being in the proximity of these people, listening to what they talked about,
Mhm.
listening to how they spoke, what were the things that they were, challenged by. It taught me a lot, and it helps me to create these conversations now because I kind of sort of know a little bit about what they're talking about. So I think it is important to be in person or at least in a hybrid capacity,
Yeah.
especially if you're just starting out.
Just being around to be exposed to different
Yeah,
conversations and departments. That makes sense. And so
exactly.
that takes us to the HR Pro. Tell us about the launching of that. What did you learn? What experiences did you go through in those first few months?
I learned everything, I think, well, a little bit of everything. It wasn't a big launch. It was a very soft launch, and
Okay.
it sort of came together as a fluke almost, a very lucky one. But I started having conversations with some real estate coaches,
Mhm.
and they were having challenges. Sorry, their clients were having challenges that they needed to hire people, and they didn't really know how to do it, and they didn't know the best way to do it, and they didn't have the tools to do it because they were still very much transacting agents or team
Uh,
leaders who were focused on that part and managing the agents
right.
versus, taking the time, spending hours reviewing resumes, interviewing people, not knowing which questions to ask and what not to ask. And so
Mhm.
so I found that they sort of nudged me in those directions and said, why don't you give this a try? This is probably something that's going to be right up your alley. You're personable. You won't have a hard time connecting with these people. And at the end of the day, once you figure out what sort of tools and qualities they're looking for, whether it's, the infamous follow-up boss or, specific use of marketing tools like Canva,
Yeah.
then, it's going to start sort of rolling down the hill with a lot more ease. And so that's exactly what I did. I had a very open mind
Mhm.
to, I don't have a clear path to success. I don't think anybody really does, but I'm going to try a whole bunch of different things and I'm going to see what sticks, like
Right.
throwing spaghetti at the wall. Um,
Right.
I know it's not a business tactic, but hey, something's bound to happen, right? So we started working with some teams and brokerages fairly quickly, and luckily, thanks to those early introductions, I was able to grow my network pretty quickly. And
Mhm.
so we've done a lot of hiring, and then of course the HR support. So as you and I know, many brokerages, teams, and not just real estate, but for example, law firms, accounting firms, smaller businesses is what I'm going to call it, smaller in terms of their internal payroll. So those
Right.
true employees. They don't have a need for an in-person HR. They don't have a need for an in-person or any sort of a full-time HR manager. They truly don't. And so this is where I come in and I help them, organize their org charts, their policies and procedures, review their contracts, their NDAs, make sure that they're compliant, and
Mhm.
that if something was to happen, that they're protected as well against potential lawsuits, of course, is what we're all trying to avoid.
Right.
Right? And then building on that and making sure that as they recruit that new person, that they have a really solid plan so that
Mhm.
the recruitment leads to great onboarding, then leads to amazing retention rates down the road as well, right? So really kind of creating that plan, that 5-year plan. We all talk about the 1-year plan. Let's talk about the 5-year plan,
Of course.
making sure that those businesses know what they're hoping to achieve, putting that down on paper, because of course we know that a dream written down becomes a goal, right?
Right.
and and then helping them through all of that. So growing their existing staff, making sure that we're developing their skill set. So not only do they not want to leave, they actually want to stay and perform at this particular business unit.
Hmm. I like that. Okay. And do you focus exclusively on the real estate market and real estate companies?
No, the real estate market has been incredible for us,
Yeah.
and I do love that sector because it's full of incredibly big personalities. I
Hmm.
really enjoy that.
I've seen.
Very entrepreneurial, obviously, as you know,
Yep.
and people make decisions quickly in this market.
Hmm.
Because of course a good person that you find that you interview that fits all of your criteria is like the perfect house on the market, right? You have to put in the offer,
Jump on it, of course.
right? You don't want to sit on it for too long.
Right.
But we do work also with many other businesses. As I've mentioned, we've got great law firm clients that have real estate vein to them, but also other areas of law. We have accounting clients, accounting firms. So certainly not. I would, every time that I have a client from a slightly different industry, I learn something new from each one of them, and we continue to build those relationships. So,
Right.
and because they're sort of in the real estate, what I'm going to call real estate support potentially industry, it's
Hmm.
amazing for me to have that network that I can then introduce to each other. And
Right.
so you might want to meet this person because you're having an issue with your current real estate lawyer. Maybe they're retiring. I actually have an amazing connection for you that could be useful, right?
Right.
Or, hey, I've heard you don't have a stager. We've got this incredible staging company that we work with. Why don't I make the introduction? You guys take it from there.
That's fantastic. Okay. So you're still open to helping out even if it's not
Absolutely,
part
of
of your
course.
clientele. That makes sense. Now, if someone
Mhm.
were looking to get into the HR industry, either as a job or maybe start their own business, what are the top three tips you would give them?
The HR industry, believe it or not, is incredibly competitive to get into from a job standpoint. And I
Okay.
remember that being a big challenge for myself, actually, when I was starting out.
Mhm.
So, I would say network definitely is the number one rule of anything
Yeah.
at this point, both with getting a job or creating your first business or in many, many businesses, hopefully.
Yep.
But definitely networking, making sure that you know what the problem that you're trying to solve is, especially as an entrepreneur. I think it's our responsibility to find out what our clients need and to
Mhm.
be able to actually help them with that one task that they just don't have the capacity for in their business,
Right.
right? And then within the HR, both from an employment standpoint and an entrepreneurial standpoint, there are so many different areas of HR, as I'm sure you can imagine, from benefits to payroll to conflict resolution to performance management to terminations to onboarding to it's such a big
A lot of
field.
hats. Yeah.
Knowing, what is your niche essentially? What is your specialty? What is the one thing or the three things that you do incredibly well, right?
Mhm.
And then you can, of course, grow from there. And if you have a company, you can continue to hire people that are experts in other areas of HR. But I think it's really important to be able to articulate to your clients what it is that you do very well.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of, you just mentioned hiring someone to fit the strengths that you might not have. What are your goals for your business right now?
That's a great question. There are a few things that I am looking to build on, which is the more techier side of HR, which nobody
Mhm.
really talks about. So we've identified a challenge for some of our clients, which is the maintenance of all of the records and
Mhm.
the seamless onboarding. Because as you can imagine, onboarding, whether you're onboarding an agent or an employee, it's very repetitive, right? So that office manager or broker of record or whoever it is, the business owner sometimes in the smaller business units, they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And they're trying not to lose their enthusiasm for doing that one task,
It
but
happens.
sometimes, right,
Right.
it gets a little bit repetitive. So, so we've been working on this portal, and this is definitely not my area of expertise. I do have a phenomenal person who's working through all of these challenges.
Right.
But, creating that portal where you, Mark, as a business owner, will come to me and say, Kata, I'm looking to onboard 10 people into my business. How do I do that so that I don't have to continue to say the same thing over and over?
Mhm.
And we've created this portal now where we can download videos, we can bring in checklists, we can upload, documentation and things like that, podcasts that you've done so that
Yeah.
your staff can get more familiar with you. And we can start rolling that out at a reasonable pace, of course, not all at once, so that whether you're an agent, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're an administrative assistant or a marketing assistant, you start getting fed this information that not only lets you know about the business, but it actually gets you excited as well, right?
Mhm.
Because it's all positive information, and it's very, very informative, and it's just something that gets you pumped to show up on your first day, right? Or and continue showing up for many years to come, hopefully.
Of course. Interesting. Okay. So last few questions for you.
Hmm.
First one, if you were not working in HR, what would you be doing?
Funny enough, I think I'd go into real estate.
Really? Why is that?
You know what? It's a very dynamic industry, and I like it. When I was studying HR, it wasn't as dynamic as it is now, and I'm happy that it's taken a turn for that. But typically, back in 70s, 80s, 90s, not a whole lot of things changed in HR,
Yeah.
and it's nice to see that that's something that's definitely been changing now. But what I love about real estate is that it's constantly changing. There's tools, whether it's an AI tool now, of course, or
Mhm.
any other tool or a new CRM or whatever that something is. It really allows for somebody to be an entrepreneur on their own, right?
Right.
So to do their marketing, whether well or not so well, and to
Right.
and to try new things, right? Whereas in typical employment, again, I'm talking about maybe slightly outdated information here, but
Right.
you have the same rules, you have the same task, you do the same thing every day, and then you leave at 5 o'clock, right? And I don't love that. Uh,
Mhm.
that sort of very strict set of rules. I like being, I guess, having an interpretive edge to how you can still do things within the rules and laws and regulations,
Right.
but maybe look at it from a slightly different angle, which I think real estate allows you to do.
That does make sense. You can be very creative in real estate, whether it comes to your prospecting methods, the
Okay.
scripting you use, a lot of different options. So I agree with you on that for sure.
Okay.
Tell me about your dream home. Walk me through a picture of what your dream home would be if you're not in it already.
My dream home. My dream home, I think, would be somewhere fairly remote.
Okay.
I love being in nature, so I think it'd be almost like a cabin in the woods, but maybe not too far away from civilization because I do still, like being able to go into town and do stuff.
Of
But
course.
I think surrounded by nature, big trees, quiet, lots of space to roam around and things like that. Lots of space for my kids to go outside and play.
Okay. I like that. And last question.
Nothing ostentatious, by the way.
Right. Last question is, how can myself or whoever watches this video support you and your business?
I think, sharing information, introducing yourself as well. I
Mhm.
don't believe that any conversation is a one-way conversation. So for me, it's important to also know how can I help them in the future? Who can I connect them with?
Right.
Right. So if somebody is looking to get in touch, I love to chat. And if they want to support, fantastic. If I can support them in any way, I love to do that as well.
That sounds good. So how can we get in touch with you if any questions come up?
You can email me at kate@thehrpro.ca, or you can give us a call at 905-538-7745. And of course, find us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on Facebook.
That's perfect. Kate, I appreciate your time. Thank you again for joining.
Nice. Thank you so much, Mark.
All right.
Have a great day.
Same to you.
Thanks. Bye.